Greetings and salutations. This is Abdelhadi with The Bitter Truth, where we may not have all the answers, but we're going to ask an awful lot of questions. You can also become a bitter pill or a spoonful of sugar, or just support the show by visiting thebittertruth.info, and you can probably get some fabulous swag there to make your life better. Today I've got Dr. Jennifer Glass. She's published numerous articles and books on family issues and gender issues in the workplace, a host of other related issues. She is the Centennial Commission professor, and she's also an executive director on the Council of Contemporary Families at UT Austin, which I have to designate for those of you that don't know, because before I moved here, I only ever thought there was a UT Austin. Kind of forgot that it was a system like UC in California. And I was embarrassed when I went to San Antonio one time and found out what the Roadrunners were. And that was quite funny. So how you doing?
I'm fine. Thank you very much for having me on.
Hey, I'm glad you, thanks for coming on. So, well, you know, I guess if 2020 was a year, or if 2020 was anything, it would be a canned Thanksgiving dinner or something. I mean, it doesn't seem like it's, just doesn't seem like anything's really abating. But we swapped some emails back and forth, and I know you had mentioned something. You've seen some statistics on working moms during the pandemic that honestly I haven't seen, and I've got some questions for you. But I mean, why don't you kind of jump into what you've been finding?
Well, one of the things we know is that in this pandemic, unlike the recession of 2008, 2009, this one has hit women especially hard because it's hit the service sector particularly hard. Right. So anything that involves direct provision of care or entertainment and any kind of personal services, including things like nail salons and haircutting. A lot of these are industries that are dominated by women. And so employment has been difficult to sustain, and job losses have been mighty in those sectors. And while the economy has recovered in many other sectors, especially the manufacturing of things, services are still in jeopardy, in large part because we're still not safe to go out and use commercial services in places where we interact with strangers on a regular basis. So this has been called a she-cession, as opposed to the 2008-2009 Great Recession, which some people called a man-cession. And this is particularly damaging at this particular point in time because historically, the United States is at the apex, as far as I can tell, of mothers being financially responsible for children. So this is kind of a perfect storm. We have seen a gradual erosion in the contributions of other institutions, including fathers, but also including employers and including the state in terms of welfare state policy and government assistance to families. So those support systems have deteriorated, and the people left holding the bag for financing the next generation of Americans has been their mothers. So we have recently used some census data to try and calculate exactly how many mothers at any given point in time and how many mothers across time are going to be the primary financial providers for their families. And we found that at any given point in time, about 42 to 45% of American children are completely or mostly dependent on their mother's earnings for their financial support. Then if we look lifetime at just the first birth of American women, so we're just looking at the first child from birth to age 18, we find that American mothers have about a 70% chance of being the primary breadwinner in their families for at least a year. And the average duration is 4 to 7 years, depending on educational level. So this is very common. This is an almost universal experience in some racial and ethnic groups. We know that for Black mothers, it's about 91%. So this is going to happen to American mothers who have children. They are going to be called on to be the primary financial providers for their children, sometimes for a very long period of time. And we as a nation just haven't really grappled with that fact. We see government retreating from the care and support of children. We see fathers retreating, not intentionally, by the way. We're not trying to blame anybody. But we've seen fathers retreating from that. And we've seen employers retreating from that in terms of the kinds of benefits and amenities that they're willing to pay workers and the pay that they're willing to give them. So we had kind of this post-war compact after World War II to keep families functioning and to share a lot of the productivity gains of the economy with the primary providers of care for children. And that's really disappeared over the ensuing 75 years. And now we're stuck with a system in which almost all mothers are expected to work as well as to care for their children. And increasingly, they're expected to do that on their own. So I wanted to say a couple things about fathers before I let you get a word in edgewise.
Well, no, I mean, just
because I know that's people hear this and the first thing they think is, oh gosh, what's happened to dads? And I want to make it really clear that
my dad was a prick, so you're not going to offend me at all. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Well, as you know, there are a large number of fathers who don't take care of their families, who abandon their children, who don't pay child support. Some of them do that because they themselves are not employed, or they're not employed at a level that they feel provides them with enough extra income to share it with their children.
Right.
Be that as it may, what we know is that for most men, especially those who only have a high school degree, their earning capacity has just stagnated since the 1970s. So part of this is that employers are just not paying wages that enable fathers to contribute to their households the way that they used to. So that's a big part of it. But the other part really is the fact that fewer and fewer fathers are living with their biological children.
Sure.
And absent fathers are far less likely to contribute a lot financially, even those that are able to do so.
Sure.
So it's kind of this situation where mothers are just left holding the bag because everybody else has walked away.
Well, you said something a second ago I want to piggyback on. So you said something to the effect of that, and I think you meant industrialized countries in the world, but that we're the worst, or we rate poorer in terms of supporting single moms. Is that a statistic?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. There are far more single mothers in the United States who live in poverty than there are in other Western industrialized countries. And that's mostly because they have safety net programs that basically prevent children from falling into poverty the way they do in the United States.
Well, that was my next. I mean, not to interrupt you, that was my next question too, and I'll just let you run. But it's costing. It seems to me that it costs employers more to not have these systems in place. We have no systems in place to support employees. If we learned anything from the pandemic, is that there's just nothing. We have jack shit. Yeah. And for the CARES Act to go through, and for the so-called liberal to say, oh no, it was great. That was the biggest upward transfer of wealth in the history of ever. And to give everybody, or not everybody, to give these guys, about 800 families, like $5 trillion, and then everyone else that needs it gets a $1,200 check. And, my day job, I deal with employers quite a little bit myself. And so I hear some guys got PPP, some guys didn't get PPP. The ones that didn't, I had about 8 clients go south this year because, they were, most businesses are about 2 months away from not making payroll.
Right.
And, but isn't that because we just don't have, we have this anathema, or not this allergy rather, to having any kind of system in place to help anybody? It just seems like we keep privatizing more and more and more. Is that something you've been seeing in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at what the United States does relative to what other countries that are like us, including Australia and Canada and England, the other English-speaking countries, they have all recognized that some of the things that we do are a drag on employers. Mm-hmm. Healthcare is the worst.
Absolutely.
I mean, the furor over single-payer healthcare is just completely incomprehensible to me.
Yep.
If you look at the innovation and the creativity and the small business operation of every other industrialized country, one of the reasons why they have such a great entrepreneurial sector, and one of the reasons why their businesses are flourishing in ways that ours aren't, is that we don't saddle them with healthcare. We don't make them pay the healthcare costs of their employees.
That's right.
Whereas that's what's going on in the United States, and it's crazy. And we do this thinking that somehow employers are going to provide, better healthcare plans than Medicare or than a single payer option would in the United States.
But see, that's the cool.
Other country has come to that conclusion. They've all said, business can't afford to do this. This is crazy.
But that's the Kool-Aid that is fed to those who are buying into this bullshit that we keep getting fed about. They want our choice of insurance. I'm not loyal to my insurance company. Right? I'm not loyal to my fucking doctor. And so, in my day job, I won't get into what my day job is, but I deal with a lot of employers. And the few that I'm able to discuss this with openly, I've had the most conservative guys with a company of 100 lives tell me if they could get rid of their healthcare costs and just pay Medicare, their bottom line would be boosted. A 100-man group runs an employer about $1.5 million to $2 million a year.
Oh yeah, healthcare is outrageously
outrageous.
And businesses with this is just crazy, because you have to have you have to meet a monopoly with a monopoly. So we need monopoly power in the Medicare, Medicaid system to be able to say to hospitals and healthcare companies, no, we're not going to let you profit off of sickness anymore.
Right.
Because that's what we've basically said. We've said to insurance companies, we've said to hospital corporations, it's okay for for hedge funds to invest in medical care
Right.
and make money off of people's misery. And no other nation, no other developed country on earth has said that that's moral or justifiable or just plain good business practice.
It's not. I mean, I've had the most. I've gotten in the habit the last 5-8 years of changing my language. So I don't say things like nationalize. I say utilize, right?
Yeah.
Or I'll ask the employer. I won't even say Medicare. I'll just say if you were able to get rid of. We're at lunch having drinks, right? Having some beers and sandwiches. And I'm like, if we were able to get rid of your healthcare costs and just pay Medicare, like, oh my God, in a minute. And then you're giving the employee a raise. Because most of these people pay a high 4 or 5, low 5 figures per year on premiums alone.
Yeah.
Not counting the deductibles, not counting the denials, not counting the copays, right?
Right.
But real quick, I want to get into a couple of other things that you'd probably be able to answer, more specifically. Because I was, obviously I was going to do a little homework before I talk to you because I don't want to look like, a total dummy. So I saw this one thing, the Pew Research Center did a study that during the pandemic, like kids with moms 12 and under, their incomes dropped 12%. And you had alluded to this earlier, that fathers with kids 12 and under, their incomes dropped 4%.
Right.
Is there like a deeper reason for all of that?
No, it really does have to do with the sectors that they're employed in.
Okay.
So if you look at manufacturing recovered pretty rapidly. In fact, we're buying more things than we used to because we're all stuck at home.
Right.
So it's really services that have been hit the hardest. And because we have such deep occupational gender segregation in terms of where men and women are located, we've seen that this is an economy where women have been particularly hard hurt. And those who are not working in services, by the way, sometimes have had to lower their work hours, even if they still have a job, because they no longer have any childcare or school.
Right.
So either they have to be home to supervise their children, or they have to be home to deal with the schoolwork that is now being placed on parents, especially for pre-K and elementary school age children. It's just impossible to stick a second grader in front of a terminal and say, oh, listen to your teacher, and expect that to work. So there are these new burdens that have been placed on mothers. And it's all part, I argue, of this transfer of responsibility for children. First we had a large extended family, then we had a thin nuclear family, and now we have an even thinner single parent or reconstituted family. And as families get more complex and get more strained, we're just simply putting more and more responsibility for children solo on them. And it's kind of like, I always think about Harry Truman when he had that sign on his desk that said, the buck stops here. I feel like every mother in America has one of those on her front door that just says, the buck stops here.
Yeah.
And that just needs to change, because the future of our competitive world economy and the education of our children, whether we like it or not, this is the next generation. If we don't invest in it, it is at our peril. And other nations understand that their smaller, diminishing cohorts of young children are the future, and they have to take care of them. So with all of this, it's also not surprising that women are having fewer children, right? If you have to take care of everything, you have to bring home the bacon and fry it up in the pan and put the kids to bed.
Okay, you just dated yourself, man. That commercial's been off the air a long time.
Well, I changed it a little bit. But, basically when you devolve everything onto moms, they're going to say, whoa, I can't do this. And they're going to restrict their fertility. So we call this in demography a birth strike. And it's been happening in Europe for a really long time. And it's why so many European countries have more generous welfare state policies for families with kids than we do, because they know this can't be sustained. Eventually, your national economy is going to fail if you cannot reproduce. And my favorite example of this is Japan. Those of us who are old enough to remember the 80s remember how scared America was that Japan was just going to outcompete us. Their cars were better. Their electronics were better.
Yeah.
Their productivity was racing through the roof. And the feeling was that they were just going to outstrip the U.S. and their system was going to be better than ours. And we would just be, weeping in the bushes. That didn't happen. And it didn't happen in large part because they never modernized their family structure and their support systems for employed mothers. And so they faced a birth strike of just epidemic proportions. Fertility is lower in most of Eastern Asia than it is anywhere else in the world because of this factor.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened is exactly what demographers said would happen. The economy ground to a halt. There's just not enough children, and there are not enough educated workers to keep that giant economy going. And none of the newer generations want to put in the, death by overwork that their fathers and their grandfathers had to deal with.
Sure.
So Japan has been basically in an economic malaise since the 1990s, when their birth rates plummeted, and they have not been able to pull them back up, despite several prominent campaigns.
Sure, but even still, with Japan's challenges, I mean, they got Marshall Plan, same as Italy and Germany after the war.
They did.
They've got socialized medicine. They've got paid for daycare, right? I mean,
well, they don't have that. They actually
they don't. Okay.
No, they do have a national health insurance, but no, they have not put any of the support systems in place that the European countries did.
Okay.
Things like long paid leaves for vacation and sick leave, a comprehensive childcare system that is low cost, or a sliding fee scale so that all families can utilize it.
Sure.
In Japan, they introduced none of those things. And so most employed mothers had to quit. They also have extreme sex discrimination in employment in Japan.
Right.
So it's very, very difficult for women to get lucrative employment. And all of these things have contributed to Japanese women, not wanting to even marry.
Sure.
But if they get married, not wanting to have children, or wanting to have at most one child, because they have to give up whatever career they've managed to fashion if they have a child.
Well, I mean, but to kind of move the needle over a little bit, let's look at the European and Nordic countries. I mean, they're not struggling, they're not suffering, and every idiot conservative that I talk to keeps bringing up fucking Venezuela, and I'm like, okay, we didn't have 195 sanctions on Venezuela. Well, you want to talk about capitalism? How about Colombia? Colombia is a failed fucking state that has a 40% poverty rate. They murder journalists. They murder campesinos by the thousands. They rig elections, but they're capitalists.
They're capitalists, yeah.
Which is translation for they give us their crap for near free, and their people work for 15 cents a day and no bathroom breaks. That's what that means, right? Then you look at Venezuela, who was doing fine before he started sanctioning their ass. But let's look at the other countries that do have these systems in place. They do have affordable housing. They do have a decent minimum wage. Quote, their taxes might be higher, but they're also not paying for college, not paying for healthcare, they're not paying for daycare. Daycare is like $2,000 a month.
Exactly. What they've done is they basically put in place what we call social insurance programs. And I think social insurance is a much better word than socialism. Socialism seems to scare people a lot.
Because they're toddlers. But continue.
Right. Yeah. They don't have a complex understanding of what social insurance is.
No.
But if you look at Social Security, it's our biggest social insurance program. It's extremely popular. It's untouchable by politicians, and nobody wants to get rid of it. And if you think about private insurance, everybody has insurance on their house and insurance on their car. Everybody wants health insurance. I mean, we like having security, and that's what insurance is.
Right.
So you have to look at the programs that are in place in the Nordic states as social insurance, because that's how they view them. Right. You pay in order to take out when you need it. And if you don't need it, great. But if you do need it, it's there for you. And you don't whine about paying your premiums because you may not need it. It's like, well, of course, I may not ever have any damage to my house, but I sleep better at night knowing that I pay that, hundreds of dollars every year to make sure that my house is insured. And what social insurance in the Nordic countries, and by the way, in most of Europe with the European Union integration, it's now to take many, many of these functions and put them into a social insurance program. So health is one of those people that goes into social insurance, not just an old age pension. Mm-hmm. They also think of childcare as being social insurance. Do you have a kid? Maybe you do, maybe you don't, maybe you will in the future, maybe you won't in the future. It doesn't matter. If you do, you will have social insurance that makes sure that your child is going to have an excellent pre-K experience and you're not going to be bankrupt from it.
Right.
And those are the kinds of things that when you explain it to people that way, they get it. You're like, oh, of course, that's a good thing. Rather than the kind of individualistic lens that we have now. I can't tell you the number of times after I've spoken, I'll get angry emails from people saying, why should I have to pay for somebody else's child? I chose not to have kids, so I wouldn't have to pay for, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, you have to pay real estate taxes for public schools. You're not screaming about that.
Right.
This is just an extension of that same thing for the education of younger children.
Right.
I don't know why that seems like such a radical idea.
Well,
we all have to live with those kids when they grow up.
Yeah, but you see papers on this every now and again. You see articles in the mainstream press every now and again. We're like a culture of me, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I grew up in LA. I grew up in South Central, and Los Angeles unified. When I grew up, I got out of high school in 1981. There, I said it. And we were like one of the top 5 school districts in the country at that time. You know what I mean? It's like I remember I was not exactly the stellar student. I came out of there with barely a B average, and never got into advanced placement classes. Anyone that knows me will tell you that. And but still, things that I came out knowing, just getting out of high school, was compared to when I taught school for a minute, and I was just like, went back to my old district like 20 odd years later, and I was subbing for a while. I was in between jobs, and I was like, oh my God, they took away everything. They took away art. They took away music. They took away everything. They even took away showers in gym. So you make a kid go out and run around, and then he's stinky the rest of the day. She's stinky the rest of the day. So most of them wouldn't do it. They'd sit on a bench and, just gossip with their friends because they didn't want to be smelly because the showers were closed. And I'm like, well, God damn it. I mean, how are you going to educate kids if they can't even focus and have any diversion from the STEM shit? Right. And that's kind of what it became, this fantasy of everyone has to try college.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I was a kid, this is a statistic that goes up and down with neighborhoods. And I know this because I got my brother's kids came out of a pretty well-off neighborhood. He's an MD, and I got some of my friends that were raised in better neighborhoods than we were. But the national average was about 20% of people try college. About 15% graduate with a bachelor's, even less with a postgraduate degree of some kind, mm-hmm. right? And some neighborhoods are higher than others, but the national average is 20%. That hasn't really changed in 40 years. Right. And so we pitch this fantasy, and then we also defund those very institutions that we expect to have the lowest common denominator was we could all read around the same level.
That's right. The public schools.
Yeah. That used to be the lowest common denominator. I remember in the mid 80s, late 80s, it came up with this thing in LA anyway called social promotion. Meaning if you were going to flunk, you didn't flunk because they didn't want to make you look bad. Whereas when I was a kid, the 20-year-old senior was a very real thing. And you didn't want to be that guy. You didn't want to be the 21-year-old senior in high school because you got left back a few times. It starts to add up. You repeat the 8th grade, repeat the 2nd grade, repeat the 5th grade. And it wasn't because they had issues. Most of them was just because they didn't want to go and they didn't do anything, right? But so now we're in this situation here where we keep diminishing, and then we complain about the results.
Yeah, we had kind of an odd scenario in places like California where we didn't have a financing mechanism for schools that was really solid and could keep up with expenses as schooling got more complicated, as we needed more assistance for kids with disabilities.
Right.
We needed more assistance with technology to prepare kids for a future. So there were lots of things that were going up. And instead, California passed a proposition that froze real estate taxes. And so you have this huge influx of needy students coming in. Most large urban public school systems now, given the level of inequality we have, most of their kids end up needing some kind of free or reduced lunch. I was just listening to a podcast about the New York public school system where that's clearly true. I know it's also true of LA. And so as our children got needier, we actually withdrew money rather than providing.
Right. And I'm from California. Proposition 13 didn't have the funds. The funds are there because not only do we have Proposition 13 in 1978 when I was in the 9th grade, but we passed the lottery in 1984.
Which was supposed to go to,
and a third of that money I would like to audit the lottery because a third of that money was supposed to go to schools. And instead, it's what you said. They keep diminishing. Mm-hmm. And then I'm like, well, see, and I mean, real quick, this is, I kind of want to get, I want to use that to piggyback on this next question. So given the pandemic, given what's going on, are we looking at anything, and you would know more than me, are we looking at anything as far as like a daycare when we return and start to really reopen? Because I see minority moms, like you said, 91% of African-American moms are, what were they doing again?
They're going to be primary breadwinners in their families.
Okay. So if that's the case, can they find a daycare, get some subsidy for it? And if so, a daycare that's not charging a premium because they are open. Because I'm an essential daycare, you need me, right? I mean, are you seeing anything to help with that situation?
No. And in fact, the childcare sector is the one sector where the PPP funds did not go. They should have targeted. They should have really focused on making sure that those places stay open so that when the economy does recover, there are places to put young children that are high quality and safe. And unfortunately, as we know, a lot of that money went to large corporate organizations and supported a lot of people with very large paychecks and didn't go to the people at the bottom. But the structural problem is larger than that, which is that childcare is never going to be sustainable if you force parents to fund it. Because parents have children when they're young, when their earnings are low. Their earning potential is going to maximize in their 40s and 50s, not in their 20s when they have young children.
Right.
So when you set up a system and you expect parents alone to pay for that care, you're going to end up with an unstable, low quality system. And every industrialized country in the world has figured that out except the United States.
Right.
These are crucial years. You can't get them back. You can't make up for them in elementary school. So this kind of reading readiness and school readiness, it's a critical period of cognitive development that you don't get back. And so this idea that somehow low-income parents who are both working full-time minimum wage jobs are going to have the time and the resources to pay for high-quality childcare is just not going to happen. But what will happen is that we will live with that child when that child grows up, having not had the cognitive enrichment that they needed, having not had the high-quality school that they needed, and having not had the kind of vocational training that will get them a good job. So they will be our future citizens, and we will have to live with them. And I think that's what most people don't understand when they just focus on themselves. They don't realize that you're going to need a doctor and a dentist in your future and a lawyer. And you're also going to need someone to check out your groceries and to deliver them to you. And all of those functions have to be done by people who are trained and honest and trustworthy. And where are they going to come from if you don't pay attention to children today?
Well, see, and to your point, though, this is the thing that, and I've heard this a million times, as I know you have, and not from the usual suspects. I know some conservative folks that say the same shit, but my chewy blue friends, right, both in LA and Austin and New York, I call them the chewy blues because they're corporate Democrat knotheads, and they love to say this kind of shit. Well, I got mine, I'm cool. Oh, I still have a job, I'm cool. Oh, I'm cashing in my 401k, I'm fine through this thing. Okay, well, first of all, your 401k is not sprinkled in pixie dust. It's the stock market, and the stock market is welfare. If you don't like that fact, then I'm sorry, you need to know that. The stock market is welfare. We've been tuning the banks into about $1 trillion a day, which, by the way, is all of student debt in this country is $1 trillion. Right? One day of bank bailouts is student debt.
Right.
And I'm going to date myself here in a second. I've done this a million times on this show. I got out of Cal Poly Pomona in 1987. I was paying $100 a quarter to go to that school.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, UT was $200 a semester.
And
I went to college.
Yeah. It's not anymore. And my buddy's kid just graduated last year from my school, $6,000 a quarter.
Yeah.
My cousin, who's older than me, went to UCLA in the 70s, paid $5 a quarter to go to UCLA, and then he got into law school, paid $5 a quarter. Just had to have the grades to get in. His books were more expensive. His books were his biggest bill.
Oh yeah.
You know, it's like, and so we look at this, and then people go, well, if they want free college, I had it. It's not like I want a pony. I mean, it's $100 is a service charge. My entire degree cost $3,000. I did 3 years of junior college, and by the way, junior college was free. Junior college is now $150 a unit. I was paying $5 a quarter, $5 for the clinic because they made every kid go to the clinic, and $5 for parking if I wanted it. Which if you didn't have it, you had to walk 1,000,000 miles. So it was $15 a semester. I said quarter. It was $15 a semester to go to my old junior college. My old junior college in California, in fact, the entire system is now $1.50 a quarter, a unit rather.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people seem to be okay with this. It's like where do we start challenging human beings, not the corporatocracy, not the oligarchs, human beings, to ask these questions?
Well, I think that we need to get a clearer message that connects the choices we make today with the quality of our individual lives in the future. So we have this kind of sense, John Donne said it best. He said, no man is an island. But we in the United States, we still act as if we're an island nation. We're just, 320 million islands, but we're not. We're all interconnected. Mm-hmm. And that's the message that I think our politicians have not been very good at explaining to the average ordinary American when they ask them to fund something. They don't really make the connection with what you get in return. I remember a long time ago, the congresswoman from Colorado, Pat Schroeder, said, Americans are not overtaxed, they are underbenefited. And I think that's true.
That's right.
We are not overtaxed. We just don't get any, we feel like we don't get
There's no bang for my buck.
That's right. Yeah.
I don't mind paying more in taxes. I have an accountant, and I know about how much I'm going to pay every year. I wouldn't mind paying, like, for example, Medicare for all. I pay several thousand a year for my own health care.
That's right.
I would pay 0.3 of a point more in my taxes to get healthcare and not worry about it. I would pay more to make sure that the schools are kosher. I would pay more to make sure college was free. So that way, when I was a kid, it took me almost 6 years to get out of school because the last year and a half, I was really stretching it out. I didn't want to graduate. The way I looked at it was I had forever to cut my hair and get a real job. So I was just like, until I discovered the record business, and that's a whole nother story. But I literally was taking extra classes that seemed interesting because I wasn't paying per unit. I was paying $100 a quarter. So I could take up to 16 units before I had to pay another $50. Ooh, I mean, that's what it was. If you take 20 units or more, it's going to be $50. It's like, ooh, right? And so I was able to take sociology. I was able to take marriage and family. I was able to take, leisure in society. I mean, all these extra classes that God forbid would make me maybe interesting at a party. Okay. As opposed to, I just majored in business, and you don't know anything. Is it going to be on the test? That kind of shit. And this seems like what we've got now, because I see a bunch of kids graduating now, and unless their parents were really super involved in their lives, a lot of the kids I see now under 30 easy are almost like they just so focused on the thing, the STEM, right?
Right. They're very focused on a vocational type of education that doesn't really prepare you for citizenship or complex decision making. It gives you technical skills, but it doesn't give you the kind of logical skills, the kind of breadth of knowledge of your society and your surroundings so that you would know how to make policy choices and electoral choices that make sense for you, your family, and your future. And instead, we end up relying on media sound bites because we haven't given our citizens an opportunity to really understand and study in depth with the best, most accurate knowledge that we can give them. And I think that's what's reflected in the kind of division in our politics right now, is that too many people are getting their information from, it's not even that they're not credible sources, it's that they're incomplete sources.
It's half the story.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
It's
and one of the
story.
functions of college is supposed to make sure that not only do you use reason and logic and evidence, but that you ferret out both sides of every issue and you look at the best arguments for both before you make a decision. And that art has almost been lost, I think.
100%.
My incoming first-year students, oftentimes, the first thing I do is I have to tell them, I know what you've been told in high school, which is that you should avoid controversy and that everybody's opinion is equally valid. And
bullshit. Thank you.
Exactly. And the first thing I say is, let me disabuse you of that notion. Everybody's opinion is not equally valid. Opinions that are backed by logic and evidence are more valuable than opinions that are not. And I always use the example of the moon, right? You can believe that the moon is made of green cheese. There's nothing I can do to stop you from believing that the moon is made of green cheese. But in this classroom, someone who says, no, the moon is made of igneous rocks has logic and evidence behind them. And that's going to count for something for me. I'm not going to say, oh, you're an evil person because you think the moon is made of green cheese. I'm just going to say, I don't think I can respect that opinion when I have an alternative that is based in logic and facts.
Well, and to your point really quick, we have moved from that. We used to be that way to a degree.
Right.
And I remember when I was like 20 years old, I had this speech 101 class with this guy. And I don't know if he's still alive or not, so I won't say his name, but he was a really cool guy. And I remember the first day of class, he said, because I know what you guys were taught before and that you can't talk about sex, religion, and politics. Bullshit. And I was like, whoa, 1984. Wow, bullshit. Wow, that's a big word, So he goes, bullshit. As long as you don't insult somebody, you can talk about anything. Be as passionate as you want to be, but you can talk about it, right? And now we've moved into this thing where people confuse their own opinion for fact.
Right.
Because you believe it is not a fact. Right? Like religion. We got freedom of religion. I got freedom from it. Right? You want to believe the Jesus story? It got a lot of great shit in there. A lot of great human nature shit in there. David and Bathsheba. At one point, I worked in the film business. I wanted to make an NC-17 movie out of David and Bathsheba. It would have been epic. Okay. And the sequel would have been Solomon out of that little union. It would have been great. Right? It was going to be sex and violence. It was awesome. It was an NC-17 rating. Anyway, didn't take off. Couldn't get any takers. But anyway, that's what I wanted to do. So the way I look at it is that when you have people looking at that saying that this is fact, there's a lot of great stories in the Bible. Well, so does the Brothers Grimm.
Right.
And so does Aesop's fables.
It's different from fact. So.
Yeah, we don't legislate on the Brothers Grimm or Aesop's fables, right? So you can believe what you want to believe, and that's cool. But then you got to understand faith and fact are two different things. Otherwise, it would be called fact and not faith.
Right.
Right? I mean, but wrapping up, we got a little bit of time here. So, so what kind of work are you involved in to sort of get, obviously you're at UT, you got kind of a megaphone a little bit. What kind of things are you involved in to sort of get the ball rolling forward from where we are?
Well, my personal issues are all about work-family accommodation policies. So I've done a lot of research on telecommuting, and I've done a lot of research on paid time off, looking at things like what are policies that would increase the happiness of parents, that might be fertility enhancing and prevent us from this, long, slow slide into a low fertility country. And also looking at what are the real on the floor challenges for America's families. So I'm also executive director of the Council on Contemporary Families, and we're really a clearinghouse of information for the public and for policymakers to find out what families are really like, not the kind of idealized vision that we have of the past, which, trust me, was not true, but what actually is going well, what we're doing right, what's become better and better and better about family life, but also the challenges that families are facing. So, we very rarely hear, for example, about how the divorce rate has really declined since the 1970s in the United States. And for people entering first marriages, the risk of divorce is actually lower than it's been in my lifetime.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
And I got a ton of friends getting divorced. Are you really?
This is a story that never gets told. Part of the reason why is that we have far, far more people cohabiting. And what we see is that marriage is now highly selective of people who have been together, who know each other's frailties, are in a good place financially, and have a decent standard of living. And those relationships are much more likely to stay solvent. So we also have many more tools for keeping families together. So those kinds of things are good news. We have stronger parent-child relationships. We know that children are closer to their parents. I grew up during the generation gap era where everybody couldn't wait to move out of their family household and, didn't really want to associate with their extended families very much. And we're exactly the opposite now. We have more familism, more children reporting that they speak to their mother and sometimes their father at least weekly. We have many more children who know their grandparents. I mean, we forget that until this generation, grandparenthood was really kind of a dicey status. Many of us did not have grandparents because they didn't live long enough to see their grandchildren.
Right. That's right.
So, we forget that at the turn of the century, if you look at 1900, which I kind of peg as the beginning of the modern era, most children would see a parent die before the age of 18. And very few of them had close relationships with their grandparents because grandparents just didn't live that long.
That's right.
And so we have this kind of Walton-esque vision of the large extended family of the past. And it's really silly because for most Americans, that just simply wasn't true. You were lucky if you had your parents in adulthood.
But if you wrote the real thing, no one would watch the Waltons.
That's right. No one would, right. We like.
I don't want to see Grandpa died in the first season. Well, fuck that. There's Grandma. She's got cancer. She's gone. Like by season 2, it's just down to the John Boy and Mary Ellen. And
exactly.
No one else.
Remember, it was Grandma. Grandma actually did die during the filming of the show. And so they had to write that into the scenario. Right. But, in real life, it was far, far worse. I mean, something like, the flu pandemic, of
1918. Yep.
That's right.
Yep.
So there were lots and lots of things that mowed people down. Pneumonia was a big killer. Childhood diseases were far more likely to result in someone losing a child, right? So children lost parents, parents lost children. Death was just much, much more common.
Sure.
And now we have relatively healthy family relationships. We have far less abuse in family households. We have a lot less family violence. So people don't tell many of the success stories.
Right.
They focus on the challenges, and the challenges are real. The biggest one is the increase in inequality, the fact that wages are so low that it's virtually impossible for some people to have the number of children that they want, and that an increasing burden is being placed on women, both to provide care, but also to provide income. So things are changing. So there are good things that are happening, and then there are these bad things that are happening. So as a sociologist and demographer, my job is to always see, okay, how are they changing? What's good? What's bad? How can we ameliorate the things that are problematic? And what can we learn from the policy experiments of other countries and what works well in some of our states and cities and counties here in the U.S.
Nice. Well, honestly, your perspective is refreshing because I didn't quite know what to expect. I think I misunderstood one of your emails, and I thought you were going to talk about how, whiz bang awesome everything was. And so I had another page of questions like, what the fuck are you talking about? But then, within 5 minutes, I'm going, oh, well, there goes that. I'll ask the next guy those questions. But no, seriously though, I really appreciate you coming on. And, feel free to reach out and you want to come on and chat about anything, anytime. I'd love to talk to you about the divorce rate going down, because my little microcosm, survey has not been good.
Well, COVID has not been good for marriage. So we do know that divorces are ticking up during this pandemic because, there can be such a thing as too much togetherness, especially with so much stress and so little support at the same time, and job loss and, lots of other things happening.
Sure.
And death, let's face it, a lot of families have been touched by the loss.
Absolutely. 100%. And to treat this like it's not, like I got a brother who's an MD and it just, he's like me, he doesn't have any hair left. And he's like, I can't pull out any more hair. It's like, it's COVID-19. He's worked on like 2,000 COVID cases in the previous 8 years rather. And he'll tell you flat out that 19 is not the flu. And he even told me in April that it was going to matriculate into a vascular issue. So a lot of these strokes and heart attacks that you see, the conservatives say, oh yeah. Half of those are misrepresented COVID deals.
No, it's COVID.
It's COVID. They got tumors in their bloodstream that, came out of their lungs. And so it's like, so yeah, it's COVID, man. And my brother, I was talking to him yesterday on the phone. He goes, man, any one of your idiot friends that wants a field trip, I'll take them into the ICU and they can watch people die with me because it's good times, and he's in Orange County, California, which has had about maybe 1,500 deaths. He's had probably about 100 or so at his hospital that he works at.
Oh yeah, it's just terrible. And there are many, many people who now know someone who's died. So I know someone personally who died. Yeah. It was a friend of mine from childhood. It was her mother, but I knew her mother.
Right.
I knew this person.
Right.
So it seems very real now in a way that it might not have seemed real in an earlier incarnation of the pandemic. So it's absolutely the case that we are in a huge social conundrum where we have a disagreement over basic public health measures that any advanced industrialized society should have in place to try and protect, if not your family members, your neighbors and your friends. It's not about you. It's really about the people around you. If you wear a mask and they wear a mask, everybody is more protected. But it can't be, I'm willing to go alone and risk it. No, you could be a spreader. You're making a choice about whether or not you get sick. You're also making a choice about whether other people get sick. Mm-hmm. And so this isn't about freedom. This is about responsibility. We're all free until our actions harm someone else.
Well, the crude joke I've been making for a few months now is I just won't wear a condom. That's my freedom. Yeah.
Right. We certainly don't say things like, I saw a t-shirt that said, mask won't protect you, but Jesus will. And I said, well, we never say things like chemo won't protect you, but Jesus will. Or,
I can't get Jesus to pick me up at the fucking airport. What do you mean he's going to protect you? Like, this is the thing that pisses me off. It's like, okay, Zeus was the king of Greece. Go fuck yourself. Like, seriously, like this. Oh, good God. All right. Well, listen, Dr. Glass, I gotta let you go. I know you have kind of a hard stop in a little bit here too.
Yeah, I do.
But I really appreciate your time, folks. My guest has been Dr. Jennifer Glass. She, like as I said earlier, and I'm going to have this stuff in the body of the show. She is the executive director on the Council of Contemporary Families, and a bunch of stuff that she's done and written about. And again, you can always visit us at thebittertruth.info. And if you want to support the show, we greatly appreciate it. And as always, if this stuff makes you uncomfortable, it's supposed to. Sleep tight.